Awesome. Well, we made it. Before we begin our fifth and final live event of the day, I had in mind a quick quote from Bettina Love where she says, quote, "Abolitionist teaching is not just about tearing down and building up, but also about the joy necessary to be in solidarity with others, knowing that your struggle for freedom is constant, but that there is beauty in the camaraderie of creating a just world." And that necessary joy and solidarity, the beauty and camaraderie is something I want to highlight, draw some attention to, even as perhaps our energy levels here at the end of the day are not at their peak. And as a reminder, this conference is made possible by you all, our wonderful attendees, and our sponsors, Holistic Think Tank, Cortico, Antioch University, Education Evolving with Teacher-Powered Schools, and Unruler. You can find links to their resources and programs in the Discord, and when this video is up on YouTube, linked below this video as well. And I'm thrilled, as you got a little bit of the back and forth there, to introduce Dr. Lena Redman and her session on Ripples at Work, the pedagogy of the self in a changing world. So thank you so much for joining us today, Lena.
Thank you very much for your introduction and for allowing me to present my model. So, and hello everyone, and I know it is the end of the day and everyone is so tired, and I am actually so thrilled to have, at least few people listening to me. So, and welcome to the Ripples at Work world. So I'm Lena Redman, as you know already. I am Russian-born, Ukrainian, Australian. So in Ukraine and in Australia, I worked as a high school teacher of arts, visual communication, graphic design, and multimedia. So here in Melbourne, I also wrote my dissertation, doctoral dissertation, and it was focused on interdisciplinary multimodal knowledge production. And the Ripples at Work model is the product of this dissertation, which was then refined through a very, very, very intense postdoctoral toiling for years, really. So before we proceed, I actually have a little bit of adjustment. I didn't think about it before. Sorry. Yeah, to do. So before we proceed, I would like people to look at the link that I attached. And if everyone can go to Mirrorbot or to Miro Map, that would be great, because what I'm actually trying to do now is to explain my my model, but with the use of Miro Map. However, because of all these, technical problems, I can share, actually, it turned out to be that I can share only one app, because screen share one app. And that's why I stuck with PowerPoint, while you can actually follow me on Miro Map. At the bottom right corner, you can see, of course, on the Miro Map, you can see plus and minus, and that is zoom in and zoom out if you would like to see the images closer. You also, yes, it's actually here. Why I close this. So you also see this toolbar, which has this sticky note tool, and you can, of course, click on, sorry, that's not what it is. So if you want to, if you want to read about this particular graphic and about these areas, so then you click on the note, and that will show you what it is all about. Sorry, I'm just getting a little bit nervous and I'm messing it up. And so here is also a sticky note. So you can just put your commands, write your commands, attach the note to the images or areas you would like to know, or maybe comment. And what I'm hoping for, I actually hoping to start a conversation here on the Miro Map. So it won't stop today, but will be continued tomorrow and after tomorrow, and maybe will bring us or take us to something, where we really are all looking for. So, yep. So I'm a learning theorist, and I emphasize that Ripples at Work model is theoretically oriented. This is not to explain that this is only the model exists only in theory and hasn't been tried yet, but it is actually to emphasize that as a society, we have our view on education is just reductionist in its nature. So this means that it is oriented to particular political social conditions. And last century, of course, as we know, it was oriented to the industrial mode of society. And now in this century, we think this is supposed to be oriented to the needs of a knowledge economy. But in both cases, it's actually oriented to teaching for employment. So, and or for further study, which is again, for employment. What is missing here is really the learning process is the idea that the learning process is actually a natural force that brought us to where we are now, and where it will bring us in the future. So biologically, or rather it's better to say biotechnologically, or in terms of our society as well and socially as well. So it is believed that Abraham Lincoln once said, the philosophy of the classroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. And so if we look at what we got ourselves into by governing with the philosophy that is the result of the philosophy of the classroom, we see that we drove our nature to the limits of its tolerance. We entered the era of profound post-truths and deep erosion of liberal democracy's values. And we created a technological environment for the biggest liars to spread their falsehoods around the world, and generated conditions for a horrifying monster like Putin, who triumphs because he has nuclear weapons up his sleeve, so he can continue committing his atrocities without getting even a scratch. And think about what Putin said in 2017. Artificial intelligence is the future. Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world. And even if we know right now that Putin is not exactly who he thinks he is, but think about that in the world of corrupt values, how much power can any ruler equipped with AI, whoever they may be, possess and exert? So my message to the world is right now that if we continue that or teaching for employment and neglecting teaching about care, about life, So we actually brought our global society to a point where we finally have to wake up and think seriously about what we mean when we say education. In this light human restoration project, of course, that we are part of today is the most important project in education. And it is a privilege, of course, for me to make my modest contribution to it. So Ripples at Work is not just about rewiring education, but reconsidering its meaning, turning pedagogy into actually science concerned with nature of learning, and how we as conscious custodians of life have to take care of the world we live in. The idea behind creating the map is to establish a new worldview, because how we see the world is actually how we see everything. And if we are about to change the meaning of education, so it will be in sync with our vision of the world. To this end, coined by C. Wright Mills, sociological imagination, it helps us to gain the deeper understanding of a new worldview for science of pedagogy. Mills described sociological imagination as a quality of mind essential to grasp the interplay of man and society, biography and history, self and the world. And as I interpreted it to the ripples, or tailored it to the ripples at work, so I described it as the ability to take a critical view of your interactions with the world, with the goal of seeing how you can make a difference by realizing your potential. So to think about the world, or to think about changing the meaning of education, we first of all have to create a new vision of the world. And it will be equipped, we know that it's equipped with advanced technology and exists in globalized environment. So our sociological imagination then enables us to see how individuals empowered with modern tools and new possibilities can actually realize their potential, and influence society in a completely new and extraordinary way. The values of liberal democracy in this conception cannot be external to these interactions, but lie at the heart of the motivational power of learning. Ripples at work learning takes place in a very tightly intertwined social, natural, and technological environment. And in Ripples at Work, they are referred to as NST, natural, social, and technological environment. And of course, these pulsate with liberal democracy values. At foundation of Ripples at Work, lies the cultivation of student being in the world through interactions with that NST environment on one hand, and being a conscious observer, and that is achieved through critical continuous critical self-reflection. So this, sorry. So through continuous critical, and mutually, this is mutually reinforcing really an ongoing process. And because the being in the world affects the cognitive development of the conscious observer, and the cognitive organization influences of the observer, influences his or her being in the world. This is ever-present dynamic of life, of any living system. And it can be characterized as catching and being caught. So I think I use this very easy sort of interpretation just to understand that is what's happening. That is what is moving, really learning. So this is the symbol with which I initially started to represent this movement, but then it became so unreliable, because even though I installed it into my font library, when people received my written documents, they basically very often cannot see it. So I started replacing it with, with this symbol, and I thought that it's actually worked quite well. Sorry. So Ripples at Work learning is also achieved through the use of another dynamic, circularity, which I refer to as learning ripple. And I give this circularity or this dynamic different interpretation. This is pushing and pulling, or being pushed and being pulled. And this is the symbol of this circularity. So, for example, being in the world, someone is asking, what if? And then, of course, this is prompted by individual circularity, makes student to look for conventional wisdom and established facts and for explanation. And then it will push basically each other. The curiosity will be pushing this looking for established fact and looking for existing or conventional wisdom, and that will go push and pull each other. So this is the learning ripple that we have to be conscious of when students are learning, and I will tell you why. So if we no, that is not. Okay. So, and of course, curiosity is a variable term here. It can be replaced with personal interest, with affinity for imagining, affinity for working with certain tools, affinity for working in certain spaces, empathy, sense of urgency, sense of concern. We can say that all these are sort of pebbles thrown in the individual situation that create ripples of that initiating the intrinsic learning. What we can also say is that the learning ripple that is pushing and pulling is actually establishing what we are doing and what it is a question and how we answering this question while moving, and this feedback sort of looping is actually how we are doing this. So this is establishing a dialogue with environment, making student to go and to talk and to record and to be in the world. And this is actually seeing how we are doing and what needs to be changed in order to improve a next step, further step. So these two dynamics, they are in constant overlap. And because they are overlapping, because one is what we're doing and another one is how we are doing. So we are actually turning the learning or progression rather of learning into that spiral progression when we're constructing knowledge by taking care of yourself and the world. So this result of this rippling is constructing knowledge and taking care of yourself and the world. That leads us into incorporation, and this is on the mirror board, so it's just increased here. Incorporation of system view of the world. System view of the world say that everything in the world, everything, in fact, in the world is part of the system and actually is the system by itself that incorporates other systems in it. So, so the interconnectedness and interdependence are the main sort of the main foundation for these structures. So this leads this interconnectedness and interdependence of various aspects. I'm not doing well, am I?
No, this is incredible. Seriously, my mind is being blown right now. Just keep going.
So forgive me, please, because I'm presenting it for the first time, and actually I spent years on my model, and I don't know, I'm just getting a little bit too excited, I guess. So what is happening now that our world is actually turning into, from the system view, we are turning our world now, not we, but by the rapid advancement of technology and by speed that is changing everything what is really around the world, and there is no certainty and there is no permanence. And as philosopher Zygmunt Bauman described our world, it is liquid modernity. That's how we actually, if we're creating the view of the world, we have to think about the world as being liquid in continuous transition. So, and in liquid modernity, the learning process and the hierarchy of the linearity is broken, and we know about it, and everyone is talking about it, that linearity is not here anymore. It is more like sort of circular or cyclic rather cyclic process of learning. So that hierarchy of pyramid with lower order at the bottom to higher order at the top is melted in that liquid modernity. So linear and pyramidal concepts of learning in these conditions are remodeled into feedback loops and learning ripples, which means continuous interactions, dialogue with environment, and conscious self-reflection on them. For example, Maslow pyramid, as we see it here. So Maslow hierarchy of needs tells us that we need to sort out first our physiological and safety needs before trying to self-actualize ourselves. But orienting our learning to the conditions of liquid modernity, we teach our students to sort out their physiological and safety need by self-actualizing themselves. And by doing so, satisfy their needs for belonging and recognition. And if there are students in a present classroom who by some unfortunate circumstances are unable to satisfy their immediate needs, what can other students to do to take care of this condition? How can they apply their imagination and curiosity to solve this immediate problem? For example, here are some bits from the video that I also just have a tiny bit of recording here. An example here is from Spanish high school, where students actually 3D printed a prosthetic arm to their classmate. And so that's how it's just very, very tiny.
Subir, baja el brazo y lo puedes dejar en el...
Just to give a little bit of life
y luego hay otro
images.
Que está en la espalda, ¿vale? Y cuando tú haces el movimiento de juntar las escápulas, pues lo que hace es pinza el dedo.
So these students might not become bioprocessists, but they learn how by taking care of others, they may make actually live a living and take care of their own physiological needs. It is natural symbiosis. That is the way of life. You take care of your environment and the environment takes care of you. So, yes, let us go. It's just my point sticking. Where's Bloom's taxonomy? Here it is. Tells us first learn and memorize facts, then understand them by practicing algorithms, then apply, analyze, evaluate, and only then create. The latest research, of course, suggests that the most effective understanding and remembering happens when students are applying, analyzing, and evaluating, and thus creating. Linearity replaced by circularities is one of the ways in which ripples at work is different from the current mainstream concept of learning that is based still on the 17th century of Newtonian Clockwork model of the universe. And Newtonian model, of course, again, we all know of the universe is governed by the fixed laws of physics, such as motion and universal gravitation, where the relationship between space, time, speed are absolute. It is a system where the movement of the cause is predetermined. it goes only one prescribed way, the clockwork direction. The individual is embedded in the ordered movement of a clock. That is what standardized learning is. There is always one direction the student has to go, and only one right answer the student has to remember to pass the test. So if you want to understand mental processes, look at biological evolution. English anthropologist Gregory Bateson recommended. And that is where the treasure lies. Moving from Newtonian clockwork 2 centuries towards to Darwin's concept of evolution, we read, any being, if it's vary, however slightly, in any manner profitable to itself, under the complex and sometimes varying conditions of life, will have a better chance of surviving and thus be naturally selected. And further, these individual differences are of the highest importance for us, for they afford materials for natural selection to act on. So, if education were considered in terms of individual cognitive development and moved at the same speed as science, Darwin's idea of natural selection would be part of how education was conceived. But education is not seen as cognitive development of the individual, but rather as preparation for employment, for, in other words, being a cog in the grand machine. So modern education may teach evolution, of course, as prescribed material for standardized knowledge, but because of the way it understands the learning process, it still treats students as cogs in a clockwork paradigm of 17th century. So RipplesWork puts the advantageous variations of the individual, however slight they may be, at the center of their learning ripple. RipplesWork learners are discoverers. They discover their best natural abilities through their interactions with NST, natural, social, and technological world, cultivate them, and self-design their individual repertoire of knowledge and skills to navigate the complex, changeable, and competitive world we live in. RipplesWork, we use the whitewater mountain river analogy as these 3D 3C sort of environment. So I refer to it as complex, changeable, and extremely competitive, because competition is really reaching its extremes. So, and this is the world of 3Cs. And RipplesWork is not really the ripples that are that we can observe in the quiet pond in the garden. So RipplesWork, it is a churning water of quickly moving and churning, so becoming like white water movements. A raft stands for a learner's unique individual characteristics and the knowledge and skills developed based on these characteristics. The skills of whitewater rafting is an analogy of the application of the unique individual traits, knowledge and skills to real life situation. And this is the process of crafting an individual agency, which is a prerequisite to succeed for the world of 3Cs. The strategy of self-designing individual agency is developed on the principle of cybernetic feedback loops. And I really underscore cybernetics because sitting in the mechanistic 17th century clockwork conventional education never really managed to use the feedback loops principle in its natural form. It again comes from biology. I remember Batson great advice about understanding cognitive processes by looking at evolution. That's exactly what the originator of cybernetics, Norbert Wiener, did. He used the term, too early, term cybernetics to establish an association with Greek word kybernetikos, which is steering. So, and as Lena describes it, it is a system of communication, and in RipplesWork, it is interactions with the world and control, and that is ongoing self-reflection on this. So by doing this, students are making meaning of them being in the world, and also they continuously reevaluating their performance and therefore reorganizing themselves for optimization of this performance. So here is a little animation that I put together, just showing what I mean by saying that there are continuous, again, I use analogy and I will explain after that. So, but how we actually respond to this interaction with the world and how they will be applied to RipplesWork model.
Let us imagine a person steering a raft on a whitewater river. The steersman's body acts as a complex system, continuously communicating with the surroundings. The rapidly changing currents are translated by the body's sense of balance. The gusts of wind are interpreted and evaluated by the body's resistance to them. Sudden splashes of water on the skin are translated by the sense of touch and temperature. The system of proprioception, awareness of the position and movements of joints and muscles, evaluates the arm muscles' resistance to the water when steering with an oar. And the heartbeat is acknowledged by the system of interoception, internal sensation. All these are essential data communicated to the mind of the steersman by his body. And according to this communication with the surroundings, the steersman continuously adjusts his own behavior to control the raft so he can progress towards his goal. What we observe here is a system of feedback loops, continuous evaluation of the previous step to determine the next one.
So as we see, feedback looping is a biologically ingrained mechanism to lead the individual towards achieving a goal. The feedback is received from the individual's own evaluation of their perception, feelings, and interactions with the environment. The most natural learning, such as learning to walk, talk, or reach for a toy, for example, happens through the engagement of internal, and let us mark this, internal system of feedback loops. So, and the development of cognitive abilities is no exception to it, to this biological pattern. I use the term feedback with its inseparable plug-in loops, because it's very important. In nature, what we observe in nature, it is not once-off occurrence, but an ongoing, never-stopping internal mechanism of looping between input and reorganization of the system to know more and perform better, however slight the steps of this progress are. The RipplesWork learners gather feedback by communicating with their learning group and obtaining existing data from media and other information resources. They are interviewing people, observing, talking to family, friends, social media communities, etc. They are not waiting for feedback to be fed, so to speak, to them, but they learn how to live by feeding on it, if it makes sense, as any other intelligent system in nature do. RipplesWork learners develop a highly intuitive cognitive mechanism for evaluating the gathered data and making improvements in their behavior and in their learning process. Standardized education simply cancels this essential internal survival mechanism. For passing tests on memorized facts and algorithms, an internal system for feedback looping has no value. So for Ripples at Work learning, however, ongoing feedback looping is the mode of operation. So this strategy, the strategy of crafting individual agency, is achieved through engagement of 4 C's, well known in education learning dimension. That is critical thinking, which in Ripples, it is actually critical self-reflection. So it is communication, which again, in Ripples, it is multimodal communication. It is collaboration, which in Ripples is interdisciplinary collaboration, and DIY creativity. Well, creativity, but in Ripples, it is DIY creativity. So in Ripples at Work, these 4 dimensions are levers of operation through which feedback loops and learning ripples are realized. These dimensions are intricately intertwined in such a way that it's impossible to talk about one of them without the others. Like you can't separate a ripple from a RipplesWork. Yes. So as we already know, in Ripples at Work, learning occurs through sort of churning of 2 dimensions. One of them is being in the world, and another one is being conscious observer. So in being in the world, learner is actively involved in the work of learning group, generating data, developing a network of social network outside of the group, developing, observing nature, doing experiments, etc. The learners bring then data that gathered individually or together to the detective's wall. In this detective's wall, they analyze data by putting gathered elements in the patterns, in meaningful, making meaningful connections and discussing those elements being in that spatial relation to each other. And in being conscious observers, students are working in their multimodal journal. So the motto of this really work in multimodal journal on self-reflection lies in these words of American and I've forgotten to say that is actually being a conscious observer. This is a metacognitive process, and working on this metacognitive process is, as American anthropologist Margaret Mead said, always remember that you are absolutely unique, just like everyone else. So students consider their work and consider their understanding of what is happening through asking questions and looking critically at their own performance. What is the most important to me here? Because they want to assert themselves on one hand, but how what is important to me be synchronized with what is important to others. So that is the continuous dynamic of self and others. Do I have any evidence that the person needs to be convinced to change their opinion, or am I just biased towards them on some personal level? What can I do to change my biased attitude towards them? So our critical thinking is more directed to actually individual student, and the student actually looking at how he or she cope with that being in the world, on one hand asserting themselves, and on the other hand integrating themselves into the project. So yes, self-reflection, and questions are, of course, vary because of the different projects, because of the different year levels, because of different demographics, because also of different approaches of teachers. And that's why in the course that I'm just would like to offer and will be offering quite soon for Ripples at Work Pedagogy course, teachers will be actually constructing their own questions, which are suitable to the discipline they teach and to their preferences. So the multimodal journal is, of course, multimodal in its nature. My presentation is multimodal because I'm using text, I'm using images, I'm using sounds, and in fact, I'm just placing a huge, actually, emphasis on sounds, because sounds are very strong emotional representation, and we just probably miss a lot when we are, not teaching students to understand music or sounds and reflect on this audio media with much more thoughtful and mindful application. So, multimodal journal is not just, what I'm doing here, representing things. Multimodal journal plus metacognitive process actually results in cinematic writing. So, and cinematic writing is what you have in mind, and we have in mind all the time images and flashes of memories and shower of words and just bits and pieces of feelings and emotions, and that's what we have in multimedia, in multimodal media, that we actually don't even explore yet. The treasure actually to reflect on what is happening in the mind of the student, and when they by themselves actually analyzing it and representation and representing it and matching with different multimodal tools. So every page of the multimodal journal is an event, cinematic event. It is the story of the student mental processes, and it is a story of students understanding, making meaning of the world. Multimodal journal is also a very important thing for students to understand where is their role in their collective and their group project. And you, of course, understood that Ripples at Work project is group project. So usually by 5, done by 5 or 6 or 7 or 4 people. So when they do their multimodal journal, and that become gradually cinematic, because not from the beginning, it's probably very difficult for them to start, to be so free in expressing themselves, but gradually they begin doing that. And they also recognize themselves as more specialized sort of person, and what role they can take in that project, in that progression. And everyone can be different. So one person is good at writing and can be the editor or media person in the group. Another one can be savvy, in computer savvy. Another one can be very good with video, or another one will be just organizing experiments and collecting scientific data. What I see here as really democratization of learning, it is the fact that every single student in that group has its role and has its talent. So there is none who is more talented than others. So one is more talented because he is gifted in science and in maths, but another one may be just kind and maybe just very caring. Or another one can maybe find their skills in mediating, some groups' problems, on some really sorting out things that are very difficult for others to sort out. For example, mathematician, the person who is very good at math could be struggling with actually communicating with others. So what I'm saying is that I think we have to create when we talk about democracy and when we talk about liberal democracy, that is actually the recognition of individual is the main point of making that individuals to feel that he is like others. Like if he is not a scientist or mathematician, but he is kind, and that is his talent. So, and that is very important to recognize. So here I would like to share a few pages from that cinematic journal. And this is not, I didn't include any really cinematic elements because that would be too much. And these are only screenshots, but what I created actually a story of James, who is my avatar in presenting the Ripples at Work project. And James is working in a group, so their task is optical illusion. And the problem is now that every person in the group has different interests. For example, Chiara, she wants to look at the optical illusions that created by perspective. And for example, Javid is saying, oh no, it's too boring. So let us look at the optical illusions that magicians are using. And Anya is in love with, or she loves very much animals, and she wants to do something with optical illusion in animals. And Caleb, he just read the book, or watched the movie, probably better to say, Catch Me If You Can. And he say, oh, you know how people actually have these psychological illusions, and they pretend, or they think that who they are not, and they behave like they are not. Like someone, for example, who think that he or she is a writer, but they are lousy writers. That's what Caleb says, not me. And so basically everyone has their own interest. And James, in fact, doesn't think that optical illusion is actually a very interesting topic at all, because he can't see how it can actually be usefully applied to life. So here James is talking to himself. Here is his dialogue, and he is looking at his interest, or his, in this particular case, resistance to the project through the eyes of his peers, through the eyes of those people who are working on this project together. And that is the whole story, which I put as a course. And I would like actually teachers to do their own story and create their own instructions. And that's what we're doing. So here is actually, that's what I'm trying to say, that every single page is a cinematic event. And every single page is where a student is actually thinking about himself, being in the world, finding their own talents, looking how their own talents could be realized in that project, but at the same time, helping others to do the same. So teachers would be putting together their own instructions. They will be looking at such ideation techniques as, for example, tinkering, bricolage, remix, and of course, it will be very individual. Everything in individual constructions for every teacher will be different. We also use these important cognitive tools as metaphor and symbolic mapping. And of course, it is difficult for students from the very beginning start, making that symbolic mapping and creating metaphor. And that's why this analogy of ripples at work, of white water rippling, and them being on the raft, which is their knowledge, which is the only steady platform they are standing, because their knowledge, their ability to use the raft in that very extreme conditions is something that making them steady, and it's their own, it's belong to them. So, but how would they find the steadiness actually being in that rippling water. So, and I offer first the analogy of that, and then students, of course, just develop their own analogy. For example, in my story, James said that the pebbles are behind the water, and what is in his mind is just form. He just cannot really put things together. So then he starts thinking, oh, I will think what other people in the group say. And if I feel that is something very steady and very serious and very valuable, I will use a pebble. So he creates a play, he creates a game. And here is a very important point. When students will start creating a play, their own play, and they make it intentionally and link to what they want to know further, so that play plus intentionality becomes actually learning, and learning how to be in the world. So, and to conclude my not very successful presentation, I think, so I would like to use this video because this video that was inspiration to my students, my design and multimedia, multimodal communication students, and to me as well. I think this is just the top of creation, really. And music, just listen to music, how much it actually makes you feel. Whatever is at hand. So isn't it amazing? And what I've forgotten to say, and that is very important, and that is assessment. The cinematic journal is an amazing, in my view, assessment, because so far I don't think we actually came up with the idea of assessing individual work in the group project. So cinematic journal actually gives you such a full idea of the journey that the students came from, where he started the project and where he finished, whether it is not whether, sorry, but it altogether, the knowledge that they actually acquired and their improved behavior, if they did improve. It is their understanding of the world. It is their maybe problems of the world that a teacher can actually pick up and help, the student to somehow find a more steadier platform, to navigate that white water river. So that's it. Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, that is, no offense to our other presenters, but probably the most interesting educational thing I've ever seen. That's fascinating. God, we'll take a few minutes here for questions, and dive into this thing, and yeah, let's take like 5-10 minutes here and do some Q&A. First off, a quick clarifying question.
Yeah.
So these cinematic journals that folks are working through, this is a framework for education specifically centered around producing these cinematic journals through these various lenses or like ripples that are heading out from the classroom. So is the idea that students and groups are producing these cinematic journals, or are teachers producing cinematic journals based off what kids are doing?
Students, it is their this is their platform where they actually do their self-reflection. So it is continuous, it is ongoing. They are working with group, and they are working with community, and they are working with social community, and they are working with nature, and they are working with basically being in the world with technology as well, because I don't think we use technology wisely enough yet. It is an amazing tool that helps actually students to understand themselves, first of all. And that's what cinematic journal is all about. Plus, I would like to emphasize here, of course, DIY creativity. So creativity here is not the creativity that someone, say, produces, an amazing piece of art. Creativity is creativity of thought. Creativity, that resourcefulness in presenting that thought, and even if students uses, first of all, of course, images and videos and photographs, just abound, you can find them everywhere. So it is not a problem. But even if they use just stick figures, but the resourcefulness, how they actually evaluate their behavior and their being in the world, and reproducing it on the pages, on the digital pages, where they actually see themselves on that digital page, and they see their growth, knowledge in terms of academic knowledge and in terms of personal knowledge as well. And we separated students from nature. We separated students from world. No matter what we do, it's always absolute separation. So here is cinematic journal is the connection of the student with the world around them and seeing themselves through that connection.
And geez, I don't even know where to start with these questions. Or else I'm going to be here all day. I don't want to keep everybody here. I could literally talk to you about this for like 3 hours. So
please do next time.
So I'm kind of taking off what Tisha is asking here. So I know this is work that you've been doing for quite a long time, assembling all of this and developing this framework. Has this been something that's been put into practice? Have students been working through this, or is this still conceptual?
I was very lucky teaching multimedia and design, and we're actually the use of, it wasn't called cinematic journal, this is my idea and my development, but developmental folio, that was actually something that was quite similar to that. It's just I am developing it and bringing it to different level, but I know how students loved their developmental folio. I know how they wanted to express their thoughts. I know how much they wanted to talk about themselves, rather about something that they don't want to hear. But interesting thing is that actually when students working in group, if they are working in group, and I also was doing these experiments, and they having different interests, actually bringing those bits of information to the table, from their own interests. Amazing thing happens, because other students learn much better from their peers, because they absorb this information, they transform it into their own developmental folios. So the really final outcomes or assessment task. So assessment task of the project is cinematic journal. And again, I'm saying it's not the quality of cinematic production. It is quality of thought and transformation. That's what we want to see in this. And another part is they're working on one project, and eventually they would come up with something, there would be outcome. It would be either, I don't know, they put together a website, they put together a 3D model, they create interactive installation, or they would do something together. But I know that in group work, teachers always struggle to assess individual students. It's such a painful question, because one student would say, oh, I've done so much, and he or she didn't do anything, and now we are getting, equal marks. And in this case, actually, cinematic journal is an absolute reflection of everything what student did, during the project.
Yeah, I mean, I would say kind of like as a final thought to this is, so we had, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Nick Susanis out in California.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, but
he did dissertation in drawing. Yes.
Yeah, he's like literally a PhD in comic books.
PhD dissertation. Yes.
And
I have it. I have his book. Yes.
Yes, unflattening is incredible. And this to me is like getting into this idea of unflattening, which is you're demonstrating a model through, it's incredibly multimodal. And it's like one of the hard parts of grasping something like this is that you are showing a non-linear trajectory of concepts. Like, this is very abstract, but it helps us refine and think of things in different ways. And as a result, as everyone's saying in the chat, like, I need to go rewatch this thing about 10 more times to like really understand even like what's going on. That's a good thing. It's not meant to be prescriptive. So with that said, I know we're running short on time, but Dr. Redman, this is amazing. I'm so stoked to share this further. I definitely want to catch up with you here in the next like month or so. I want to talk to you more about what you're doing here.
Yes, definitely. I would love to. So yes. Yeah,
awesome.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us here today. Appreciate you being here, and we'll talk again soon. If you want to come to our game night, that's later today. Check out the Discord notifications, but otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow morning.